There's a moment that happens in every conversation where you feel it. That creeping need to justify your decisions, to explain your choices, to defend your existence. And in that moment, Machiavelli would tell you, you've already lost. Not the argument, not the debate, but something far more valuable, your power. Because the second you begin to explain yourself, you hand over control to the person demanding the explanation. You place your authority in their hands and ask them to judge whether you deserve it. This is the great paradox of our age. We live in a time that worships transparency, authenticity, and constant communication. Yet the more we explain, the less powerful we become. So what happens to the person who chooses silence in a world that demands confession? We're drowning in explanations. Scroll through any social media platform and you'll see it. The constant justification of choices, the defense of lifestyles, the endless performance of being understood. We explain why we chose this career, why we ended that relationship, why we're taking time off, why we're working too much, why we look tired, why we look happy. We've turned our entire lives into a courtroom where we're perpetually on trial, and the jury is everyone with an internet connection and an opinion. The phone in your pocket has become a confessional booth, except there's no absolution waiting on the other side, only the temporary relief of being seen, followed immediately by the anxiety of being judged. We've confused vulnerability with wisdom and openness with strength. And somewhere in all that noise, we forgot what Machiavelli understood 500 years ago. That mystery is magnetic, and explanation is surrender. That's where our story begins, in the war between noise and power, between the compulsion to be understood and the discipline to remain unknowable. Niccolò Machiavelli wrote The Prince in 1513, not as a guide to cruelty, but as a manual of survival in a world where perception shapes reality. He watched princes rise and fall, observed how power moved through Italian courts like weather, unpredictable, often brutal, always responsive to invisible forces. And what he saw was this: the leaders who lasted weren't the kindest or the most honest. They were the ones who understood that power exists in the space between what people know and what they imagine. The moment you fill that space with explanations, you collapse the mystery. You become ordinary, manageable, dismissible. Machiavelli's brilliance wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. He saw what comfort hides, that people respect control, not confession. That authority shrinks under the weight of justification. That the powerful don't explain themselves because they don't need permission to exist. But here's what makes this difficult. We're wired for connection. Every fiber of our social brain screams at us to be understood, to bridge the gap between our inner world and the outer perception of us. Carl Jung would say this is the persona fighting with the shadow. The mask we wear in public, constantly negotiating with the parts of ourselves we've learned to hide. When someone misunderstands us, when they question our motives or doubt our decisions, something ancient activates. It's not just ego, it's survival instinct. For most of human history, being misunderstood by your tribe could mean exile, and exile meant death. So we explain, we justify, we perform our goodness, our rationality, our worthiness of acceptance. Every time you feel that urge to defend yourself, it's not weakness, it's 10,000 years of evolution whispering that belonging equals survival. But evolution hasn't caught up to the modern world, where belonging to everyone means belonging to no one, and where over-explanation doesn't create safety, it creates contempt. Think about the last time you felt compelled to explain a decision. Maybe it was a career change, a relationship boundary, a choice that felt right in your gut but looked questionable from the outside. Do you remember that feeling? The way your heart rate increased slightly? The rehearsal of arguments in your mind? The anticipation of judgment? And then the actual explanation. The way you presented your case, marshaled your evidence, hoped for approval. Now think about what happened next. Did the explanation create respect? Or did it invite more questions, more doubt, more cross-examination? Because here's what Machiavelli understood and what we keep forgetting: justification invites interrogation. The moment you explain, you suggest that your decision requires external validation. You open the door to debate. You imply that your choice is negotiable, pending the approval of whoever's listening. And once that door is open, your power walks right through it. Every time you justify yourself, it's the shadow speaking, the part of you that still craves permission to exist. Jung called the shadow the repository of everything we've denied, repressed, or rejected about ourselves. It's not just the dark impulses or the socially unacceptable desires. It's also the power we're afraid to claim, the authority we've learned to apologize for, the strength we've been taught to dilute. For many of us, especially those raised to be agreeable, to not make waves, to consider others' feelings above our own clarity, the shadow contains our sovereignty. We've buried our right to simply be, without explanation, without apology, without the exhausting performance of justifying our existence. And so when challenged, we don't respond from our center, we respond from our wound. The wound that says, I'm only acceptable if I can prove I'm acceptable. I'm only worthy if I can explain my worthiness. I only deserve space if I can rationalize why I deserve it. This is the exhaustion you feel after certain conversations, not just tiredness, but a deeper depletion. It's the cost of constantly translating yourself into a language that seeks approval rather than speaks truth. You can feel it in your body. The tension in your chest when someone questions your decision, the way your words speed up and your voice rises slightly, the mental gymnastics of anticipating objections and preemptively addressing them. You're not having a conversation. You're performing an audit of your own life, with someone else holding the ledger. And the cruelest part? Even when you explain yourself perfectly, even when your logic is airtight and your reasoning impeccable, you don't feel powerful. You feel relieved at best, resentful at worst. Because deep down, you know you shouldn't have had to explain at all. The resentment is the shadow's signature. It shows up in the quiet moments after you've justified yourself, when you replay the conversation and think, why did I even explain that? It's my life, my choice, my boundary. That anger you feel, at them for asking, at yourself for answering, that's your power trying to reclaim itself. But instead of listening to it, most of us push it back down. We tell ourselves we're being mature, reasonable, good communicators. We've been taught that healthy relationships require explanation, that boundaries need justification, that saying no without a detailed reason is somehow cruel or immature. And so we keep explaining, keep justifying, keep bleeding our authority into the hands of anyone who asks for it. We become invisible in our own lives, present, but constantly translating, constantly performing, constantly seeking permission to be who we already are. Here's the hidden mechanism, the thing that keeps this cycle running. Society is built on a contract that rewards conformity and punishes deviation. Friedrich Nietzsche called it herd morality, the collective agreement that individual sovereignty is dangerous, that standing apart is suspicious, that the nail that sticks up must be hammered down. The herd operates on explanation because explanation is control. When you explain yourself, you're submitting your choices to the group's evaluation. You're saying, here's what I did, here's why I did it, please confirm that I'm still acceptable. And the group, sensing your need for approval, tightens its grip. It asks more questions. It demands more justification, because your willingness to explain signals that your power is negotiable, and negotiable power isn't power at all. It's permission temporarily granted, perpetually revocable. Jung wrote about the persona, the mask we wear to navigate society, the version of ourselves we present to gain acceptance. The persona isn't bad, it's necessary. We all need to function in the world, to work with others, to maintain relationships. But Jung warned that when the persona becomes who we think we are, when the mask merges with the face, we lose touch with the self, the authentic core that exists independent of external validation. Over-explanation is the persona's desperate attempt to maintain acceptance at any cost. It's the mask working overtime, constantly checking, am I still acceptable? Have I explained myself well enough? Do they understand? Do they approve? And beneath that frantic performance, the self grows quieter, smaller, less certain of its own authority. The tragedy isn't that we wear masks. The tragedy is that we forget we're wearing them, and we start to believe that our worth depends on how well the mask performs. Power begins when you stop explaining. Not because explanation is always wrong, but because the compulsion to explain, that automatic, desperate need to justify your existence to anyone who questions it, that compulsion is the sound of your power leaking away. Think about the people you respect most, the individuals who command rooms without raising their voices, who set boundaries without lengthy justification, who make decisions and simply move forward. What do they have in common? They don't explain themselves to people who haven't earned an explanation. They don't confuse transparency with wisdom or vulnerability with weakness. They understand that some things, their choices, their boundaries, their inner lives, belong to them, and sharing those things is a privilege they grant selectively, not a duty they owe universally. Machiavelli wrote in The Prince, "Everyone sees what you appear to be, few experience what you really are." This isn't cynicism, it's observation. People respond to the image you project more than the reality you explain. When you constantly justify yourself, you're trying to control how people see you by giving them access to your reasoning, your doubts, your internal process. But here's the paradox. The more access you give, the less impressive you become. Mystery creates respect. Certainty commands attention. When you simply act without extensive explanation, people fill the silence with their own projections, and those projections are almost always more powerful than any explanation you could provide. The leader who says, "This is the decision," and moves forward creates more confidence than the leader who says, "This is the decision, and here are the 17 reasons why I made it, and I hope you understand, and please let me know if you have concerns." One sounds like authority, the other sounds like a request for approval. Look at how this played out historically. When Caesar crossed the Rubicon, he didn't convene a forum to explain why breaking Roman law was justified. He simply said, "The die is cast," and marched. When Marcus Aurelius made decisions as emperor, he reflected deeply in his private writings, but publicly, he acted with decisive clarity. The Stoics understood this principle: ruminate internally, act externally. Your inner world is where you work through doubt, examine motives, question yourself. Your outer world is where you embody the clarity you've reached. Mixing the two, bringing your internal deliberation into your external presentation, doesn't make you authentic. It makes you uncertain, and uncertainty in a leader, in a decision maker, in anyone claiming their own authority, invites challenge. People don't follow uncertainty. They probe it, test it, undermine it. They respect the person who has clearly done the internal work and now stands in the decision without apology. But what about honesty? What about integrity? Isn't refusing to explain yourself just manipulation by another name? This is where we have to distinguish between strategic silence and deceptive secrecy. Machiavelli wasn't advocating for lying. He was advocating for boundaries. There's a profound difference between deceiving people and simply declining to give them access to your reasoning process. When you make a decision to change careers, to end a relationship, to set a boundary, to pursue a path that others don't understand, you owe affected parties respect and clarity about the decision itself. I'm moving to another city. This relationship isn't working for me. I won't be able to take that on. But you don't owe them your entire internal deliberation. You don't owe them a defense. The decision itself is the communication. Everything beyond that is you seeking approval, not providing clarity. Think about it. When someone asks, why? After you've stated a decision, what are they really asking for? Sometimes it's genuine curiosity or a legitimate need to understand how the decision affects them. But often, more often than we admit, why? Is a challenge. It's, convince me this is acceptable. It's, prove to me you've thought this through to my standards. It's, give me something to argue with. And the moment you take the bait, the moment you start explaining, you've agreed to a trial where the other person is judge. You've suggested that your decision needs their approval to be valid. Machiavelli would tell you, the powerful don't submit to trials they didn't agree to. They hear the challenge in, why? And they respond not with justification, but with reaffirmation. This is what I've decided. This is what works for me. This is the direction I'm moving. The statement stands on its own. It doesn't beg for permission. Now here's where it gets psychologically interesting, where Machiavelli meets Jung in the dark. When you stop explaining yourself, you force other people to confront their own projections. Jung believed that what we see in others is often what we've denied in ourselves. When someone demands you explain your unconventional choice, your refusal to follow the expected path, your assertion of a boundary, what they're really confronting is their own unlived life. Your unexplained freedom mirrors their explained captivity. Your willingness to simply be, without justification, highlights their own compulsive need for approval. This is why boundary setting feels so aggressive to people who have none. This is why your silence feels like arrogance to people who over-explain. You're not attacking them, you're reflecting back what they're afraid to claim for themselves. And rather than face that reflection, it's easier to demand you explain, to challenge your right to stand in your own authority, to pull you back into the herd where everyone justifies their existence to everyone else. The transformation happens when you integrate this understanding, when you stop seeing explanation as a virtue and start seeing it as a choice. Some things deserve explanation. Some people have earned access to your reasoning. Your closest relationships, your genuine collaborators, the people who've proven themselves trustworthy with your vulnerability. Yes, they get more of you, including the thought process behind your decisions. But the key word is earned. Not everyone gets that access. Not every question deserves an answer. Not every challenge requires a defense. And the moment you internalize this, something shifts. You stop feeling guilty for having boundaries. You stop experiencing your own sovereignty as something that needs justification. You begin to understand what Machiavelli knew, that your power doesn't come from making everyone understand you. It comes from understanding yourself so clearly that external validation becomes irrelevant. Where does this leave you? Standing at the edge of every interaction where someone expects an explanation, feeling that old familiar pull to justify, to defend, to perform your acceptability. But now you're aware of what's happening. You can feel the difference between a genuine question and a power play. You can sense when explanation serves connection and when it serves submission. This awareness is the beginning, but it's also the most uncomfortable part. Because now you can't unknow it. You can't go back to unconscious explanation without feeling the cost. That subtle dimming of your fire every time you hand your authority to someone who didn't earn it. Every time you explain yourself to someone who hasn't demonstrated they deserve access to your inner world. You feel it. A small death of sovereignty. A little betrayal of the self that knows its own worth without external confirmation. Jung would say this discomfort is the shadow demanding integration. You've spent years, maybe decades, pushing down your right to exist without explanation. You've learned to make yourself small, to be agreeable, to prioritize others' comfort over your own clarity. That's the shadow, not the darkness you fear, but the power you've been taught to deny. And integrating the shadow doesn't mean becoming cruel or cold or dismissive. It means reclaiming the parts of yourself you've disowned. It means standing in your decisions without apology. It means letting your no be no, your yes be yes, and your silence be answer enough. This integration isn't comfortable. It means disappointing people who expect access to your reasoning. It means being misunderstood by those who need you to explain to feel comfortable. It means accepting that some people will interpret your boundaries as arrogance, your silence as hostility, your self-possession as selfishness. And letting them. Nietzsche called this self-overcoming, the will to power not over others, but over your own need for approval. He wrote, "The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. If you try it, you will be lonely often, and sometimes frightened. But no price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself." This is the transformation, from emotional reactivity to calm dominance, from the frantic need to be understood to the quiet confidence of knowing yourself, from explaining your existence to simply existing, unapologetically and without negotiation. You stop performing for an audience that has no stake in your actual well-being. You stop translating yourself into a language designed to please others rather than express truth. You reclaim your energy from the endless project of making everyone comfortable with your choices. And here's what happens when you make this shift. People start treating you differently. Not everyone will like it. Some people are deeply invested in your availability for interrogation, in your willingness to submit to their evaluation. Those people will fall away, and that's not a loss. But others, the ones who respect sovereignty in themselves and others, will lean in. They'll recognize something in you that they're cultivating in themselves. Your refusal to explain becomes permission for them to stop explaining. Your boundaries become a template for their own. Power isn't domination. It's the ability to remain yourself in the presence of pressure to be something else. And when you embody that, you give others permission to do the same. You become living proof that you can exist without constant justification, that you can make choices without a committee, that you can be misunderstood and survive. Think about tomorrow, the next time someone asks you to explain a decision that's already made, a boundary that's already set, a choice that's already yours. Feel that familiar pull to justify, to perform, to seek approval. And then pause, just for a moment. In that pause, ask yourself, does this person need this explanation to understand how my decision affects them? Or are they asking me to submit my authority for their evaluation? Is this a genuine request for connection, or is it a challenge disguised as curiosity? And if it's the latter, if you sense that explanation will invite more interrogation rather than create more understanding, what happens if you simply don't? What happens if you say, calmly, clearly, without hostility, I've made this decision. I'm confident in it. And then you stop. You let the silence do its work. You let them sit with their discomfort instead of rushing to ease it at the cost of your own power. This is the practical application of Machiavelli's wisdom. Conserve your energy. Every explanation is an expenditure of energy, mental, emotional, spiritual. Some expenditures are investments. They deepen relationships, create understanding, build trust with people who've earned it. But most explanations aren't investments. They're leaks. They're your power draining away into the void of people who ask questions not to understand you better, but to understand you less, to reduce you to something manageable, explainable, controllable. You stop explaining not because you're cold, but because you've learned that silence is the language of the strong. You've learned that mystery preserves power, that boundaries create respect, that the people worth having in your life don't need you to justify your existence. They accept it as given. Machiavelli's wisdom was never about cruelty. It was about clarity, about seeing power dynamics as they are, not as we wish they were. About understanding that in a world full of people performing their lives for approval, the person who simply lives without constant justification becomes magnetic. Not because they're withholding or manipulative, but because they're integrated. They've done the internal work of knowing themselves, and that knowing is so solid that external validation becomes unnecessary. They're not seeking permission to be who they are. They're not asking the world to confirm their choices. They've granted themselves the authority they used to beg others to provide. And that authority, self-generated, self-sustained, unshakable, that's what Machiavelli meant by power. The world will always demand explanations. Your family will ask why you're making unconventional choices. Your colleagues will question your boundaries. Strangers on the internet will demand you justify your existence according to their values. And in every one of those moments, you'll feel that pull, that ancient, evolutionary compulsion to explain, to justify, to seek the safety of acceptance. But the wise understand, power doesn't explain. It simply is. It makes decisions from a place of internal clarity and lets those decisions stand. It builds a life based on self-knowledge rather than external approval. It walks through the world not seeking understanding from everyone, but offering it to the few who've earned access. And in that selectivity, in that refusal to explain yourself to those who have no claim on your inner world, you reclaim what you've been giving away your entire life. The sovereign right to exist on your own terms, without apology, without justification, without the exhausting performance of proving you deserve the space you occupy. You already deserve it. You always did. And the moment you stop explaining that to people who will never accept it anyway, you'll finally understand what Machiavelli was trying to tell you. Power isn't something you perform. It's something you embody when you finally stop performing altogether. If you're drawn to ideas like this, philosophy that cuts through the noise and speaks to something deeper in you, subscribe to Culturo. We're exploring what it means to reclaim your power, integrate your shadow, and live without the constant need for external validation. This is just the beginning.